Welcome again, everyone, to our Monday session, the beginning of our Monday session, and we're starting it off with our final main stage plenary speaker. Let me introduce Dr. Luciana de Oliveira. She is coming to us today from Brazil. Which side of Brazil are you coming from? It's a very big country.
I'm in the countryside of the state of São Paulo. My hometown is called Araraquara.
All right, there we go. So for all you geography majors, you can start Google mapping that or Google worlding that. So Dr. de Oliveira is actually the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs and professor at Virginia Commonwealth University. Okay, Virginia Commonwealth University, not the University of Virginia, which I made that mistake. I'm deeply sorry. I'm no disrespect to Virginians. So professor at Virginia Commonwealth University. So she was also professor in the Department of Teaching and Learning at the University of Miami, in Miami, Florida, and served as chair of the Department of Teaching and Learning from 2016 until 2020. So her research focuses on issues related to teaching emergent to advanced bilinguals at the K through 12 level, including the role of language in learning the content areas and teacher education, advocacy, and social justice. Currently, Dr. de Oliveira's research examines scaffolding in elementary classrooms, and she was also the president of the TESOL International Association. So I could keep reading and I could keep talking, and I'm very, I told her before the camera was rolling how impressed and sort of an immediate model she was, I think, for me and maybe everyone else in the audience about what we can aspire and achieve in our careers. So with that, Dr. de Oliveira, take it away.
Thank you so much for the lovely introduction and for highlighting some of the things in my bio. I appreciate that. And I wanted to thank JALT for the invitation again to be one of your plenary speakers. I also did a workshop yesterday. So it was Sunday morning for you, I believe. And it was Saturday evening for me here in Brazil. Very happy to have been able to do both a workshop and also this plenary today. So thanks again for the invitation. And I'm gonna go ahead and get started. I hope you can all see my screen okay. Let me know. So the topic that I'm gonna focus on today, great. Thanks for the thumbs up. The topic that I'm going to focus on today is preparing teachers of young learners, and I'm going to be discussing some promising practices for these young learners, especially young learners of English. So there are a few things that I'm going to be focusing on. I'm going to provide some examples of promising practices used by teachers of young learners of English at the elementary school level in the United States. These practices draw on students' backgrounds and experiences while also expanding their repertoires in the English language. I will also be demonstrating how these promising practices in literacy instruction specifically foster linguistic, literate, and cultural multilingualism. And finally, we'll describe ways in which teachers promote learning through language and learning about language. So the framework that I draw on from this work is called culturally sustaining pedagogies. So you may have heard this term before, but culturally sustaining pedagogies address the multi-ethnic and multilingual nature of many classrooms and maintain, hence the word sustaining in its title, the practices of students while also expanding their repertoires to include, quote, dominant languages, literacies, and other cultural practices, end quote. So students are also able to critique such practices. So one of the goals of culturally sustaining pedagogies is to help perpetuate and foster, quote, linguistic, literate, and cultural pluralism as part of the democratic project of schooling, end quote. And this is from Paris. And this is a crucial goal in the education of our multilingual learners. So what I'm going to be drawing from and providing examples of is these culturally sustaining teaching practices, what I call CSTP, in 2 elementary classrooms. So these practices draw on students' cultural and linguistic affordances to promote learning through language and learning about language. And the way that I frame this culturally sustaining teaching practices is around the work on scaffolding for meaningful interactions, looking at what we call planned or macro scaffolding, and also interactional or micro scaffolding. So if you were in my workshop yesterday, you got a little bit of an intro to those terms, and I will be explaining them in more detail in just a few minutes. And so these 2 key scaffolding practices, I would say, or types of scaffolding, both planned and interactional, are what I'm calling culturally sustaining teaching practices. So the use of those scaffolding strategies specifically. So going into more depth on planned and interactional scaffolding. So the macro level or planned scaffolding includes students' prior knowledge and experience, connecting to what students already know, selection and sequencing of tasks, providing a logical sequence in which in-depth understanding of challenging concepts occurs within the appropriate context. We also include participant structures, and that means changing the organizational structure within a unit of instruction, which includes choice of individual, pair work, or group work. And that's a decision that is dependent on the learning purposes of the task or activity. Semiotic systems and message abundance. So using various visual, oral, and tactile supports. And here I have some examples: wall charts, graphs, maps, photographs, diagrams, pictures, artifacts. All of those create what we call message abundance and ensuring students access to information by both language-bound and non-linguistic means. So you may have heard, of course, the term multimodal teaching, right? So multimodal ways of meaning making. That's what we mean by using these different semiotic systems and providing message abundance for our multilingual learners. We also have what we call some mediational texts. And those are, so basically it's selecting and integrating any instrumental text around which significant talk occurs and which serve as ways to link prior or future learning. And finally, under planned scaffolding, we also have the development of metalinguistic and metacognitive awareness. Metalinguistic awareness refers to what we call developing a metalanguage or a language for talking about language. And metacognition refers to reflecting on what helps students learn. So these are some things within scaffolding that you can plan for. Then you also have what we call interactional scaffolding. So interactional scaffolding includes 3 key components: linking to prior experience, pointing to new experiences, and recapping. So that includes referencing, hold on just a second, there you go. I'm trying to move things around here so I can see my screen. Referencing students out of school, home, and school experiences to link to broader conceptual frameworks, and locating new learning in students' prior experiences and signaling what will follow is particularly important for students less familiar with the language and culture of the school. So that's what we mean by linking to prior experiences, pointing to new experiences, and recapping. Then we have what we call appropriating and recasting students' contribution. That refers to picking up what students are saying and recasting students' language into more content, language, or context appropriate discourse. Then we have what we call initiation, response, feedback sequence. That means providing opportunities for students to say more and reflect aloud on their thinking and understanding, asking for clarifications, probing a student's response, asking to explain a particular point in detail. And this contrasts to IRE, which is initiation, response, evaluation, which is very typical of classroom discourse. Let's say that, I'm the teacher and I ask a question. What color is my top? My student says black. And then I will say, excellent, and then move on to another student. So that's a very typical structure of classroom discourse: initiation by the teacher, response by the student, evaluation by the teacher, and then moving on. What we want to do in that third move is provide what we call feedback. And that could be asking additional questions, asking students to clarify, asking students to explain. So you may see why questions, how questions, or questions to help students say more and do more with language. And so this third move in the IRF sequence is extremely important for our multilingual learners. And these are things that you do in the moment of speaking. So that means it's in the moment of the interaction that you do these things. So scaffolding is typically thought of as things that you plan for. So you may think of things like that you hand out for your students, or the different participant structures that you have in your classroom that provide scaffolding for, for specific content. But we think less about this piece of interactional scaffolding, and that is really the most critical for our language learners. And that's the kind of work that I actually do, is to focus on interactional scaffolding in elementary classrooms specifically. But really, I've done this work at the secondary level. So it really can be done at all levels, including at the university. So this framework is really for all levels and all language levels. So some examples of culturally sustaining teaching practices in the area of planned scaffolding, and this comes from my research at the elementary level. Those include use multilingual learners' home languages and cultures as a resource, integrate the languages and cultures of multilingual learners into instruction and discussions, develop a language for talking about language, or what we call a meta language, use message abundance to provide challenging content, not simplify instruction. And within interactional scaffolding, you're going to see some examples of encourage classroom interactions through the use of interactional scaffolding moves. So that framework of interactional scaffolding, we actually went a little bit deeper, and we identified the different moves that teachers make when they are providing these interactional scaffolding. And that's what I'm going to share next. I hope I'm not going too fast. So let me know in the Q&A or in the chat if you think I'm going too fast. I can slow down. But the interactional scaffolding moves are extremely important for teachers, and especially for teachers of young learners. The first one is what we call appropriation. Teachers utilize language and tools previously used. Recapping. Teachers briefly summarize the major points of the interaction. Recasting. Teachers put what students say into academically appropriate discourse. Sometimes it's more culturally appropriate discourse. Cued elicitation, teachers offer strong hints, spoken or gestural, about desired responses. Moving the discourse forward, teachers provide students with opportunities to say more. And this move is extremely important for our language learners. So they have more opportunities to say more. Elaboration, teachers supplement contributions with additional information. And elaboration, this move is typically, it typically relates to, for example, when the teacher includes their personal experiences or connects to their family, things like that. So that's what I mean by elaboration. It's when you have this, when teachers supplement contributions, usually contributions from students, with additional information, and typically it's examples of their own. Clarification, teachers clarify what students say. And then finally, something that we found very interesting in our work is what we call purposeful repetition. Teachers draw attention, repeat so all can hear, and provide cues to self-correct or extend thoughts. So they usually repeat what students have just said. And so purposeful repetition usually comes in with other moves. So there's purposeful repetition and then some other move right after that. So all of these interactional scaffolding moves are very, very important. And we identified all of them in classrooms, in elementary classrooms with multilingual learners. So if you want to take a screenshot, you can go ahead and do that now, because you are going to be doing an activity and helping me think through some of these things with some examples from classrooms. So I'm going to draw on 2 research studies. It's not a research presentation, but I do have several examples that come from research. And I focused on scaffolding for meaningful interactions with multilingual learners with a kindergarten teacher in Indiana and a first grade teacher in Florida. And we focused on planned and interactional scaffolding and the teaching of writing. And some of you already saw some examples from the first grade classroom yesterday. So the kindergarten classroom was from Indiana. It's Miss Ruby Lee, it was the teacher. She's white American. She considers herself monolingual, but she developed Spanish as a classroom resource. At the time of the study, she was an experienced teacher already with 9 years of teaching experience. She had 23 kindergarten students and 8 were classified as English language learners, and they were all Spanish speakers. We focused on scaffolding in classroom instruction for multilingual learners. And you can see the data sources that we used on the screen as well. The mediational text that she used was When I Am Old with You, and you will see some examples drawing from that book. I don't know if you know that book, but it's a wonderful book. So just a brief summary of what Ms. Lee did. She provided academic and social support through the use of a range of planned scaffolds, including selection and sequencing of tasks with step-by-step direction of activities that provided a logical sequence, participant structures that varied within the unit depending on the nature of the task, the degree and nature of scaffolding, and she also used changes in grouping because of that. She provided a lot of message abundance, and she used home languages and cultures of the students. She also provided purposeful interactional scaffolds in classroom interactions with explicit links to culture and prior experiences, moving the discourse forward, clarification and elaboration, and also appropriation and recasting of students' contributions. So here's one example of the culturally sustaining teaching practice that I call use message abundance to provide challenging content, not simplify instruction. So Ms. Lee uses all of the potential meaning-making techniques that she has at her disposal, ranging from technology, such as use of interactive whiteboards, videos, interactive worksheets, on-the-fly image usage, to other multimodal strategies, such as gestures, body language, songs, and picture books. She uses illustrative pictures from the book to talk about important concepts and raise students' awareness of the meanings expressed in the book. So I will be Miss Lee. I need some students. So let's say it's just one student really. So you can just unmute your microphones, those of you who are able to on the webinar to help me. So I'll be Miss Lee. Do you think the boy loves bacon so much that's the reason that he wants to have bacon? Or do you think there's another reason he's telling me this, Chris? So students provide various answers. What's most important to him right now? Eating the bacon or something else?
He's with granddad.
Because he's with his granddaddy. I think so too. It's that look. Look how happy that boy looks. I don't think he's that happy because he's eating bacon. I think he's that happy because he's with his granddaddy.
The picture is nice.
I like this picture too. Remember when we talked about relatives? Look at all these people, and the teacher points to the drawings that students did on the wall. So you can see here that there is a discussion about what's going on in the text and also in the picture. So you can see that it is perhaps challenging content for students, but she's not simplifying it. She is really asking them questions, helping them reflect on the picture. So that's really, really important for our young learners, and especially our young learners of English. He also has developed a language for talking about language, or a meta language. And that's, again, remember, this is kindergarten, okay? So they're really little. So that's another culturally sustaining teaching practice. So I'll be Miss Lee, and maybe you can help me by being students again. These are the biggest words, right? Usually wherever the letters are bigger and have a pretty font, a font means what the letters look like. So you see how these letters are kind of twirly and these are kind of straight? These are called different fonts. They're all letters. You can read them, right?
Yes.
Okay, see this M? Does it look exactly the same as this one?
No.
No, it's a little different. That's called a different font. Usually, wherever the font is biggest and pretty, that's the title. So this is the
title.
Yes. Thank you so much for the help. So you can see here that Miss Lee is using some of this meta language that is going to be important. Again, this is kindergarten. They're just starting to learn to read and write and learning all of these different words, right? So font, letters, what the letters look like. She uses things like twirly and straight. And again, you know, the fonts is definitely a kind of meta language that she's helping students learn about. So those are some examples, again, that are important for kindergartners. So another example, and this is just Miss Lee, who has at least one grandma? ¿Quién tiene una abuela? So who has a grandmother? Everybody has a grandma? ¿Todos tienen una abuela? Sí. So everybody has a grandma? Yes. Yes. Or who has a grandpa? Raise your hand if you have a grandpa. ¿Quién tiene un abuelo? So who has a grandpa? If you don't have a grandpa, then do this for your grandma, okay? Si no tienes un abuelo, puedes dibujar tu abuela. If you don't have a grandpa, you can draw your grandma. If you have both, you can choose one. So you can see here a couple of different culturally sustaining teaching practices that I mentioned at the beginning. One of them is integration of home languages and cultures of multilingual learners into instruction and discussions. And the other one is the use of multilingual learners' home languages and cultures as a resource. So it's not only the integration of the home languages, so with asking the questions that I was mentioning, so she's using Spanish. As I mentioned, all of her students were Spanish speakers, but she's also using their home languages and cultures as a resource to give them directions, to ask questions, things like that. And I know that this can be a little bit controversial in an English as a foreign language context of, using students' home languages, but it's actually, in our context in the US, we have seen this as a really important part of what teachers do when they're teaching English. So they're using students' home languages and cultures as a resource and integrating them into instruction. Again, to help them understand the content, to help them feel more comfortable. So I think that this notion of English only is very much from last century. So I'm a big proponent of bilingual education, and I feel very, very strongly that we have to integrate students' languages and cultures into our instruction. So I typically get a question about, oh, but this could be, if we share the same language of our students, maybe they will just rely on, their home languages all the time and not practice English. So that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that, their home languages and cultures can be used as a resource. So just like Ms. Lee is using here, she is speaking English, but she's using some Spanish to clarify, to ask questions, to clarify instructions, like when she says, if you don't have a grandpa, you can draw your grandma. So that is basically clarification. So that's actually one of the interactional scaffolding moves, right? So clarifying what the task is for students. So you can use students' home languages judiciously to help you teach English. So that's really important. So I wanted to clarify that from the beginning because I typically get a question like that. So hopefully that made sense. So here are a couple of other examples, and we have some different planned and interactional scaffolding moves here. So I will be Miss Lee. I need somebody to be Guadalupe, and I also need some students. So I'll be Miss Lee.
I'll be a student.
And I'm reading from the book. In the evening, we can roast corn on a big fire and invite everyone we know and eat it. We can play cards and dance and talk about everything. Guadalupe, and that's the end quote, right, from the book. Guadalupe, I've been to your families where you're building the new house. You guys don't roast it over a fire. How do you make corn?
Well, we just make fire with dogs, and we can make with marshmallows and chocolate and crackers.
That's s'mores. You roast your marshmallows over a fire, don't you? But when you guys make corn, don't you have a special oven outside you put it in? It's yummy. It's not a grill. They actually have an oven like in Mexico. They have a really cool oven where they can put the corn in it and it tastes yummy. it kind of roasts it like a fire, but it's inside of an oven. We usually in the United States, most of us, when we have a fire, we roast marshmallows. What else have you roasted over a fire?
Hot dogs.
Hot
Hot
dogs.
dogs. Yes, thank you. Yes, exactly. So here you can see some other interactional scaffolding moves. So we also have integration of cultures of multilingual learners into discussions, because you can see you guys don't roast it over a fire. So Miss Lee has been to the family's house and knows this. So she's trying to get Guadalupe to talk about this. And she actually wasn't sure, I think, about corn, but she mentioned marshmallows, chocolate, crackers, right? So that was interesting. And then Miss Lee was able to explain what that was. So she is with how do you make corn? She's using the interactional scaffolding move of moving the discourse forward. So she could have just said, oh, you guys don't roast it over a fire, you do it this way. But instead, she's asking, how do you make corn? Guadalupe didn't quite answer that question. She went a different direction, but it was still important for her to kind of express what she wanted to say. Then Miss Lee used the interactional scaffolding move of clarification. So that's s'mores, that's clarification. Also moving the discourse forward again, and purposeful repetition right at the end. So here you can see Miss Lee is just repeating and is not adding anything else after that, but you're going to see with other examples that typically the purposeful repetition comes in with other moves. And again, this whole example is an example of integration of cultures of multilingual learners into discussions. Another example, again, meet some students. So where are they at?
Outside.
Outside, maybe at their house, though, at grandpa's house?
Yeah.
So the grandpa is sitting there, right? The grandpa is sitting there, and they like to do what?
Swat the flies.
Swat the flies. So here you see some other examples. You have purposeful repetition, elaboration. So when students say outside, she actually elaborates, and so it's outside, but she's actually being more specific, right? As she says these things. So she says their house and grandpa's house. So she's being more specific with the examples. Then she clarifies. So the grandpa is sitting there, right? And she does the acute elicitation. Remember, it's when the teacher offers strong hints about desired responses. So she actually knows the answer to this question, and that's where acute elicitation comes in. And they like to do what? And then students reply, and then she provides purposeful repetition again. This kind of conversation, even though the students are only responding sometimes with a few words here and there, these kinds of discussion, this kind of interactional scaffolding is really, really important for our multilingual learners, because you are asking them to say more and do more with language. So moving on to Miss Cabana, she had 23 first grade students. Most of them were bilingual. Some were classified as ESOL, and we focused on scaffolding in classroom instruction, and she taught first grade. She used the mediational text called Let's Stop on Market Street, and that's the story of CJ, and he goes with his Nana to a soup kitchen, and CJ's feelings change as the story progresses. So she provided connections and support. She also used a range of planned scaffolds, including students' prior knowledge and experience, connections to what students already knew, participant structures that enhanced community and collaboration, support for use of home languages and cultures, integration of multilingual learners' cultures into instruction and discussions. She also used purposeful interactional scaffolds, including explicit links to culture and prior experiences, moving the discourse forward, appropriation and recasting of students' contributions, and purposeful repetition. And I put an asterisk next to moving the discourse forward and purposeful repetition, because those were the most used moves. So here's an example, and I will be Miss Cabana, and I need a Juan. Maybe Wayne can be Juan for me?
Juan, yes.
Thank you. Okay, so I'll be Miss Cabana. The story that we're going to start, and those of you in the audience, could you please think about the different moves here, especially the interactional scaffolding moves, and also any other culturally sustaining teaching practice that I've mentioned before, and what you see here happening, okay? So the story that we're going to start is Last Stop on Market Street. Before we begin, I wanted to ask you some things. First of all, has anyone gone away to visit a family member? Juan, who did you go visit?
My grandpa and grandma.
And where do they live?
In Argentina. And I'm going there this Christmas.
Oh, for the holiday break, you'll be heading over there. What do you need to take to get there? Because you live here in Florida. So what do you take to get there?
A plane?
A plane. Do you go with your whole family, or does mom and dad take you there and you stay with them for a little while by yourself?
I go with the whole family.
Okay, thank you so much. So here you see some of these culturally sustaining teaching practices, I hope very clearly. One is, again, integration of cultures into instruction. So this question, has anyone gone away to visit a family member? And we also see several of what we call moving the discourse forward. So remember when I mentioned the initiation by the teacher, response by the student, and then evaluation by the teacher as the third move? Instead of doing the evaluation, the teacher here is doing the feedback, right? And the feedback is in the form of asking another question. So instead of saying, excellent, and now I go and I talk to Guadalupe, right? So another student, instead of doing that, she's continuing the conversation. And where do they live? And then Juan answers, Miss C continues. Juan answers, Miss C continues. Juan answers. So you can see that there is a lot more interaction here. What do you think this, for the holiday break, you'll be heading over there? It's also interactional scaffolding. Any ideas? I'm gonna see in the chat box. No? Nothing so far? Okay, so this is a very interesting interactional scaffolding move. It's what we call recasting. So notice that Juan used Christmas, but Miss Cabana used the holiday break. Does everybody celebrate Christmas? No, not everybody celebrates Christmas, but everybody has a holiday break. At least at this school, they had a holiday break. So what she did was recast Juan's discourse into what was more culturally appropriate. There were a lot of students in this classroom that were Jewish. They do not celebrate Christmas. They celebrate Hanukkah. So by doing this recast, she was being more culturally appropriate and also more inclusive of all the students in her classroom. So I thought that that was really interesting. Again, moving the discourse forward with another question. So what do you take to get there? What do you need? Then we have another example of purposeful repetition and moving the discourse forward. So Ms. Cabana usually uses purposeful repetition with moving the discourse forward. Really, really interesting examples here, I think. Okay, another example with Hugo. So I need a Hugo.
Hugo.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so Hugo is traveling from Miami, Florida to Brazil, which is in South America, like Nico does too. And then this time you're not only visiting your grandparents, but also your aunt and uncle. That is his tio and his tia. And sometimes you stay alone with your grandparents and your parents come back over here to work.
Yeah, and my aunts and my uncles.
Okay, so how is that? Because I think you're the first one to say that you spent some time alone with just your grandparents and not your parents. So what was that like?
It was fun.
It was fun? Why?
Because I slept over with my primo.
Primo is cousin. So when he was able to sleep over with his cousins. That is fun. My daughter stays over at her grandmother's too to sleep over with her cousins a lot. And that is sometimes her favorite time. Thank you for sharing. So again, here you see an example. So you can probably imagine what had just happened prior to this excerpt, right? Hugo was explaining that he goes to Brazil, or I should say he comes to Brazil, right? And visiting grandparents, and he liked to use the words tio and tia, right? In his explanations, and the teacher clarified that tio is uncle and tia is aunt. So you can see that happening here. So this short summary that the teacher provided is what we call recapping. So recapping is very important, especially sometimes when students explain lots of things and the teacher wants to ask for more information or ask to clarify. So what is happening here at the end, the question that she's asking, I didn't identify that as clarification, but she is asking a clarifying question. So other interactional scaffolding moves, again, moving the discourse forward. So how is that? What was that like? Again, those are really, really important for our young learners. Another use of purposeful repetition. It was fun. Why? Again, purposeful repetition accompanied by moving the discourse forward. So she repeated and then asked a why question. And again, Hugo used primo in that sentence. And then Ms. Cabana clarified and said primo is cousin. So she's clarifying. And then lastly, she's using some of these personal experiences, right, with her daughter. And she says, oh, you know, my daughter stays over and that's sometimes her favorite time. So all of those things are what we call elaboration. So we do that a lot as teachers. And finally, the primo is cousin, and the use of tio and tia up in the first part of the excerpt. All of those are some examples of use of multilingual learners' home languages and cultures as a resource. Again, students use their home languages, and the teacher, in this case, she knew the words in Portuguese because she's also a Spanish speaker, and the words are exactly the same, except for different pronunciation. So she's able to draw on those and use them as a resource. So very interesting examples, and I hope you enjoyed hearing about all of these culturally sustaining teaching practices. And again, all of these examples are an example of integration of cultures into instruction. So finally, just to finalize some of these ideas, I think we need to be thinking about culturally sustaining teaching practices as promising practices and teaching as a plurilingual practice. So what we want to do is to eliminate monolingual practices in classrooms, textbooks, teacher education, because we live in a multilingual world. So to me, that is a really critical piece. We want to draw on our students' home languages in teaching, and we need to challenge the monolingual principle of strict compartmentalization of languages in the classroom. We want to use fluid language practices that affirm linguistic and cultural diversity in and beyond the classroom. We also want to eliminate simplification, because we need what we call high challenge and high support classrooms. And we do that by providing scaffolding for our students, including interactional scaffolding, not just the things that you plan for, but the things that you can do in the moment of interaction. So using those, so what was that like? Why, how questions, right? So we can ask our students to say more and do more with language. We also want to critically analyze our everyday practices with a pluralistic lens. So I hope that these examples provide you with some ideas for your own classrooms about what to do. And I hope that when you go back, maybe later today or tomorrow to your classrooms, you can start analyzing your own language to see the kinds of questions that you're asking your students, to see the kind of language that you're using. Are you being monolingual all the time? Can you be more plurilingual? Can you be more multilingual with your students? Can you, again, use some of these culturally sustaining teaching practices in your own practice? Even if you don't teach at the elementary school level, if you teach at any level, you can use some of these culturally sustaining teaching practices. So I hope this was helpful to you, and I hope you enjoyed this conversation, and especially hearing from Ms. Lee and Ms. Cabana. Here are a few publications on the research studies that I discussed today. And I'm just waiting a little bit if you want to take a screenshot. I also have a framework called Language-Based Approach to Content Instruction that I've presented on for many presentations. So if you're interested in that, here are a few references. And here as well. And then any other, here's my contact information. One of my books is actually published by Oxford University Press. So I wanted to highlight that. That is on the right side of your screen. It's called Focus on Grammar and Meaning. Very popular book, and it actually is more about the presentation that I did yesterday than the presentation that I did today. But since they are a sponsor for this, I thought I would mention it. So thank you so much. And I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and see if there are questions.
Okay, thank you so much for your presentation. Very good. We do have a couple of questions there. Let's give a round of applause. I'm sorry. Thank you. Quick round of applause.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was excellent.
All right. We do have some questions here. If you want to ask a question, you can raise your hand and we'll get to you. There is a question in the Q&A, which I can explain again. This is from Marshall. The question is, how much of the home language do you think is appropriate, and what ratio would be the most appropriate?
So I don't like to talk about ratios because I think that this has to occur naturally in the classroom. But I do have a couple of publications about use of home language, especially with Ms. Lee, how she used the home language of her students. And there were actually very specific reasons why she used the home language. Let me try to remember all of them. But one was to clarify instructions, like the example here. One was to affirm students' vocabulary usage sometimes. Ms. Cabana has done that as well. So with the use of chiu and chia, she clarified for other students what those words were, things like that. So, you know, you can use it judiciously to help students, to make sure that students know that you value their home languages and cultures, and that you are drawing on them for instruction. So sometimes we forget, and we want to say that students don't come with those resources. And what I want to say is that you should use them, you know, use what students bring as resources for their learning of English. And in consequence, sometimes they will learn more about their home language, let's say Japanese, right? So you can make contrasts, you can, you know, draw on what they're saying, especially if you share the home language with your students. It's a little bit more difficult, of course, when you have multiple languages represented, but you can still affirm their experiences and backgrounds again. So to me, that's really, really important.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. Wonderful. See, again, if you have any questions, you can raise your hand or put it in the Q&A box. There's another question from Namiko, if that's okay. Here we go.
Oh.
Yep. In the examples provided, learners did not use their home language in the classroom. This occurs often in our EFL classrooms. Is there a term for when a student says something in their L1 and the teacher uses L2 to teach that new word?
I don't know specifically a term for that, but we often use the term translanguaging for when we talk about when the teacher and students, they're all using whatever language repertoires that they have. So they're making use of all of their language repertoires. So we often talk about this as translanguaging. So it's much more than code switching. So code switching is one thing, and translanguaging is really more about the process. But I'm not aware of any terminology specific to that. And I just want to say a shout out to Marshall Klassen, who was one of my doctoral students and actually worked with me on the project for Miss Lee, and is in many of my publications there on my list of publications. I did not know that he was going to be in the audience, so I'm very happy to say hi to Marshall today.
See if I can get
Thank you
Marshall
very
up
much.
here.
Hey.
Oh, thank you very much. Hopefully next time you can actually come to the country, and
Yes,
I'd like to
I
show
would
you
love
around.
that.
I would love that too. I was
Yes.
really hoping that it would happen this year, but please
Yes.
come next year to JALT.
Yes,
We will
thank
definitely
you.
have some
Yes,
time. Thank you again for your presentation today.
thanks, Marshall.
Now I have to go to class, so sorry, but thank you for letting me have that quick talk. Thank you so much.
Hello. Yes.
Thank you again.
Wonderful.
All right. Once again, if you have any questions, we do have a bit of time left. If you want to raise your hand or ask in the Q&A, that'd be great.
I'm so happy we have time for questions.
Yes, I think that's a good chance to interact with our plenary speakers.
Mm-hmm.
Usually they use the entire full hour, which is great. But
Yeah.
yep.
Oh, the first reference slide. Yes.
Okay, while you're
I think it was this.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. There's a question, a raised hand, if I can get that on board here. Let me get her. There we go. All right, you're on the air.
Feel free to ask.
Oh, okay, thank you very much for your great presentation. I just wonder, because your teachers are trying very much to expand the students' spoken language using IRE over. So have you ever checked the ratio change because of the teachers' effort to go beyond IRE? Then the students started to move on to, and then so the kind of effect of your effort is my.
Yeah, so that's exactly what we were looking at. So we were not looking, so these examples are not IRE, they're actually examples of IRF. So the feedback.
Sorry, IRF.
Yes,
right,
the
so,
feedback of the, the questions and all of those things is what we consider the feedback, right? So kinds of questions like that. So we saw a change from the beginning of the year to the end of the year that students were able to say more as the year progressed. And especially the interactional scaffolding moves of moving the discourse forward and cued elicitation. Those two were the most used, but, well, I'm talking mostly about Ms. Cabana, because that's the most recent research study that I did. And so with Ms. Cabana, those two were the most common. And we did see a change from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, as students progressed through the year. So those interactional scaffolding moves specifically were very, very important for our multilingual learners.
Thank you very much, because I also heard similar findings from the L1 research. It was very encouraging. Thank you so much.
No problem. Thanks for the question.
Yes.